Okay, Kitty. You are most welcome. Here, Kitty. A veritable feast. Hey everyone, welcome back to Rachel's Studio and session 4 of my new How to Paint Fur series. Remember, a new thing that I'm doing with almost all my videos is putting chapters in so you can hover along the timeline and a little information chapter index will pop up and you can see all the different things that I'm going to talk about and you can skip to whatever you're interested in. Today we're going to deep dive into pairings of paper moisture and paint consistencies to see all the different effects that you can get with different pairings of these two factors, paint consistency and paper moisture levels. I'll be showing you real world examples, and remember, there might be a few bloopers at the end. I mean, I know you think I'm perfect, but yeah, I know. And what you see playing here is my first demonstration. I've done this demonstration twice on video, and the first time I did it on Baohong cold press watercolor paper, which is a great substitute if you want to save a little bit of money, but you still want to work on cold press 100% cotton paper. And I highly encourage that you do that, because if you don't, you will not get all these subtle nuances that you're going to see today in this demonstration. So I painted this first on Baohong, and I just didn't like a few of the effects I was getting, some spidery looking vein effects where the paper was wet, and I didn't like it. So I switched to the demo you're going to see, to Arches Cold Press 140 pound, my favorite all-time paper. It is more expensive, but I just can't find a paper that gives me all the effects that I want. Plus, it's good at taking scrubbing. So just remember, paper is the #1 most important art supply that you can get. You can skimp on brushes, you can skimp on paint, but if you really want to get these really beautiful watercolor effects in all their glory, you've got to use 100% cotton watercolor paper, except maybe for fluid, which I also talked about in my first video session, so be sure to check that out here. And by the way, when you click on these links that I share, it will not take you out of this video, it'll just queue it up for you so you can watch it later. All right, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this demonstration and take a look at me painting this whole demonstration now on Arches Cold Press 140 pound paper. So I'm gonna get it very wet across here. Run my brush over it several times to get it equally wet. I'm going to get it really wet just for the purposes of this demonstration. Almost puddling. Then this will be fairly wet. Buckling level wet. Wring out my brush and I'm going to just sop up the excess, and then we'll also give this time to dry, and then this is going to be perfectly dry. I'm going to use this brush that it's a Rake brush and it has individual little tips, so you'll be able to see hopefully more the effect of the control and how much things blossom out. So I'm going to get cream consistency on my brush here. Add a little bit here. So it's really blossoming out there. So here you see me painting my black and white bunny, one of my all-time favorite tutorials, and it's been one of my most popular tutorials with my Patreon members and my online students. And this is probably one of the techniques I use 50 to 60% of the time. I love this technique, and it's where I get the paper really wet and I use really thick cream consistency paint. So here is a real world example, and this is great for making really fluffy fur. And normally when you paint fur, you're going to paint in a lot of layers, but one way to get around that is if you, oh Kitty, be careful. She almost fell. But with this technique, a lot of times all it takes is one go and you've got the fur done. I'm painting on very wet paper with lamp black paint, my Daniel Smith lamp black paint. That's I mean, you try to say that fast. Can you do it? Oh yeah, you can, okay. But I'm using Daniel Smith lamp black paint. By the way, you don't want your paper too wet, you don't want it too dry. If it blossoms out too much, then you know you need to wait, let it dry, maybe blot it up a little bit with a tissue, and then try again. Then I'm going to get milk by adding a little bit more water. Here. All right, here's another real world example of me using milk consistency on very wet paint. In this instance, I actually am using this technique in the very first underpainting And remember, I just did a video about underpainting, so be sure to check that out. I'll link it here. I got my tea consistency yellow underpainting done, and then while it was still wet in the same painting session, I went in with milk consistency with a mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue and dropped in some milk consistency paint into this layer to go ahead and block in. That's another term we artists use, block in. It's when you're first painting your first bits of color and you block in the basic colors in the painting. And as you can see, this dog has big blocks of brown and big blocks of yellow. So here I'm painting in some burnt sienna with a little bit of ultramarine blue mixed together and some of the darker colorings of his coat. And then really watery. Here. You see how much lighter that is, medium, super dark. All right, in this demonstration, you see me getting the ear wet with clear water and then going in with very watery paint in some of the areas of this ear where the ear is lighter and putting in tea consistency paint. I'm also using milk consistency paint, but I'm mixing it up between milk and tea consistency paint in this little underpainting I'm doing of the ear. You see how much lighter that is, medium, super dark. I'm going to dry up my brush, make sure I have cream consistency here. I'm going to do a little test like I often do in a real world situation. So this is just a test. Okay, this is going to be a lot more controlled, I think. I'm going to blot a little bit though. See. Okay. Now that is starting to dry. So this is a good demonstration. This is the amount of water I love to have on my paper when I'm trying to do really soft fur like that, but it's still really controlled. Or I love to paint eyeliner on this level of moisture with my silver black velvet size 8 that has a nice little point on it. I'm gonna make sure it's very cream consistency by dotting this out, and then do that eye demonstration again, and that is just perfect. But that, see how nice control I have, but I'm not getting any hard edges either. And also just, now that's dry, but just really beautiful soft marks. It's just lovely. All right, here I'm using this combination, this pairing of buckling paper with very cream consistency paint. Again, another one of my most favorite, most commonly used techniques to get really dark but soft marks like this Black Labs eyeliner. And I wanted it to be soft, but it also had to hold its shape and stay in a very small area. So the way that I did that is to work on buckling paper that is pretty darn dry, but still moist enough so that when the paint touches the paper, it just softly blossoms out just a little bit, just to make everything look nice and soft and natural, as opposed to cut out with hard edges. And you can see the bottom of the eye, especially on the inside of the eye, is perfectly dry. And do you see how that edge is a lot harder than the soft edge that was created when I painted on damp paper, buckling paper, along the top edge of the eye? And you see me touching the paper with my little pinky. That's me touching the paper, feeling the paper for how damp it is, because if it's not just perfect, this technique will not work. If your paper is too wet, your paint will explode and blossom out beyond control of what you wanted. If it's too dry, it will create hard edges. But the trick to using this technique is to really be patient with your paper and wait until your paper is just the right amount of dampness. And like I said before, the way that you really check is do a little test, put a little tiny dot and see how your paint reacts. If it blossoms out too much, blot it up, let the paper dry for maybe a minute more, and then try again. All right, let's try this on cream consistency paint, or milk consistency, sorry. This might be too dry now. Nope, perfect. This clip was very hard to find because when I'm working on buckling paper, remember, most of the time you want to work with cream consistency paint so you don't get cauliflowers. But here I was working on the wetter side of buckling and dropped in some milk consistency paint for a lighter area of coloring on this horse's muzzle, and it did work. But if my paintbrush had a little bit more water in it, I would have created some cauliflowers here. So just be careful with this technique. And then tea consistency. I'm going to blot my brush a little bit. Look how much this is running. Oh, that's dry. It's hard to get it. That's the thing, when you're working on buckling wet paper, you have to work quickly, or else this is what happens. This is a very good at showing you what happens in the real world. And you can just kind of, let's erase it and try again. Now that is buckling damp because I just blotted it up, so let's try again with tea consistency. So it still holds its shape pretty well, but it's lighter than this, and this is the darkest. And this is super dark. Okay, for this clip, I wanted to demo this demo for you instead of showing you a real world clip. I really want you to see the effect. And this is also what I call my push technique. I've made a video about my push technique. I'll link it here. And it's when you have cream consistency paint and it's in the buckling stage and you go in with a little drip, a half drip of water on your brush, and you paint through your cream consistency paint. Or if you have two areas of cream consistency paint that are separated by a divide of moist paper with no paint on it, you can drip the water in that area between the two bits of cream consistency paint, and it will spread out and create a cauliflower effect or a push technique. And let's see how I do this. So I'm painting my cream consistency paint here on buckling paper, and then I wait until it's just the right amount of dryness. The paper is at the buckling stage, and I take a little drip of water and I paint clear water across this dry area. And this is great for tabby stripes. For the lighter parts of tabby stripes, you drip water where you want it to be lighter and to push out into the dark paint and create these neat textures. And then here is what it looks like after it dries. Sometimes it doesn't look like it's working until it's completely dry, and then you see the effect, but you see these little cauliflowers of lines that are lighter than the dark paint. So again, this is a technique that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, but it's really fun to play with. So do a few experiments, do a drill like this, and just see what kind of effects you can get. And different paints react in different ways to this technique, and definitely different papers react in different ways to this technique. So you just have to experiment with the materials that you're working with and see what you get. All right, now let's see on Arches cold press, dry, perfectly dry, what happens when you paint with cream consistency paint on very dry paper. Just a little bit of paint, a little bit of clear water added to my paint here. I'm going to blot to make sure I have all the excess water out of my brush, and I just have cream consistency paint. So you get that rough texture, which is good for rocks, brindle fur, fur that is being hit by the sun and it's kind of glistening. I could see that would be good. In this next clip, I'm going to show you using my Silver Black Velvet size 8 round, and I'm getting very cream consistency paint on my brush by scrubbing a damp brush vigorously onto my dry lamp black in my palette, and then I'm splaying my bristles out. You'll see my bristles are all splayed out like that, and then I rub them over the dry paper to create a coarse, almost brindled but dry brush technique to simulate the rough furs that are on this fawn's face. Now, let's add a little bit of water, and we'll use milk consistency paint and see what we get with milk consistency. Now that would be good for an effect like this, and especially along the top edge or the very edge of the animal where you want the fur to really show. This is wet on dry technique. This is dry on dry technique. This is wet on dry technique. All right, in this clip you see me painting Sadie, and I'm painting on dry paper with milk consistency paint, and you can see the painting is almost done, and this is how I typically work on fur, in layers. So you usually have to paint several layers to get the complexity and the values right. So here I'm using the tip of my brush and just using some milk consistency paint on dry paper to get a few little fur textures that jut out into the background beneath her ear. And then let's get really tea consistency paint and see you get even thicker lines there, and everything's a lot lighter than with the milk consistency, which it doesn't look much lighter, but when this dries, this will be a lot lighter than this. It should be. In this next clip, you see me painting on the fawn's face. Again, the painting is pretty far along, but I'm working in layers. Everything's dry underneath that I've already completed, and I'm adding another glaze on top of this fawn's face to continue to add complexity with tea consistency paint on her muzzle. Another very common way that I use tea consistency paint on dry paper is at the very, very beginning of the painting. I won't put on a first wash of just clear water and then charge paint into it. I can also work on completely dry paper with tea consistency paint to get the first layer or the first underpainting done, like I did in this painting. And notice how I keep the colors changing. I did a much more in-depth video tutorial with this, featuring the footage of this dog, so be sure to check out the link here if I'm able to link this many videos. All right, so hopefully that gives you a better idea of different effects you can get depending on how much water you have in your brush and how much water you have on your paper. I would like to invite you to come check out my website, www.rachelstudio.com. You can go to tutorials here, and then you can go to Patreon Index, and here you will see the finished images of some of the paintings that you saw in this tutorial. And you can also see what tutorials you'll get if you join my Patreon or my YouTube membership. And I'm clicking on a few things here that are free. There's a free tutorial, real-time tutorial of Sadie, and there's a free real-time tutorial of the Bengal cat. Textures instead of soft, fluffy, soft and fluffy. That's kitty. Oh, no, that's not what I mean. So, demonstration, if you just want to skip over the Baohong thing, just click on the chapters. They're there for you. I might have been a used car salesman in my last life. I don't know. Either that or a princess with a lot of horses. And different pairings of moisture level. Okay. Now, yeah, 6. Okay. Daniel Smith I can read Fox and Socks really fast, but I can't say this. I don't know why. All right, thank you so much for joining me on my fur series. Be sure to check out the rest of my channel, and I'll see you all next week. Bye.